I have really spent the last 24 hours trying to decide what I think are the three most entertaining features or events or parts of the last 24 hours of American political life, which in so many ways is unique. It is something that we've never really seen before because the extent of Joe Biden's disastrous performance is unprecedented in American political life. You've had candidates before who have turned in poor or inadequate debate performances, but nothing in the category, in the universe of what Joe Biden did last night. And it's very difficult to pick the three funniest or most revealing, entertainingly revealing moments because there really are so many of them. The exchange that they had about who was the better golfer when Joe Biden claimed to have a 6 handicap, and that was the one time that Trump wasn't pretending to be offended and outraged, but was genuinely and earnestly enraged that Biden would claim to be a 6 handicap, and they bickered over that, and then it ended with Trump saying, "Joe, I've seen your golf swing. You don't have to try and convince me." There's all kinds of moments like that. There are those moments where Joe Biden just in mid-sentence, just his brain went off, and he just started grasping around for words and just kind of floating away mid-sentence. It was extremely uncomfortable to watch. But at the same time, you knew that the people in media who had been spending months and years vehemently denying what everyone knew was true, namely that there was cognitive impairment of a very significant kind plaguing Joe Biden. And they weren't just denying that, they were attacking and maligning anyone who said it as being part of the right-wing disinformation machine. You knew that they were watching and were watching in horror and were going to have to deal with it in some way. But if I had to pick the one thing that actually made me laugh the most, it was when halfway through the debate, when every Democrat, every liberal, office holder, politician, pundit, activist, journalist were all admitting that this was a debacle of unprecedented proportions. All of a sudden, halfway into the debate, multiple media outlets started running to social media and announcing a breaking news story. And they were using sirens, and they said, Joe Biden has a cold tonight, according to sources familiar with the matter. So out of nowhere, just halfway through the debate, they all started to say, oh, Joe Biden has a cold. That's why he's doing so poorly. And obviously, if Joe Biden had a cold, that's something you would announce beforehand. It's not something that would just, obviously the Biden people started calling every media outlet that they control and saying, oh, we want to tell you the scoop, Joe Biden has a cold, and they all ran out of nowhere in the middle of the debate to say, breaking, Joe Biden has a cold. I think the second funniest thing that I saw was after the debate, when Joe Biden led Joe Biden to a debate after event, she was speaking for him because he had just proven that he is incapable of speaking for himself. And she tried to encourage him, tried to make him feel good by saying, Joe, you answered every one of those questions. And he kind of had this grin on his face. And honestly, I really do remember it was many years ago when one of my kids had failed a test and was very upset. And they were very young, and I remember sitting down with him and trying to give them encouragement. And that was one of the things I said was, look, you answered every question. So you tried so hard. You answered every question. And you could just see how the people around Joe Biden treat him. You know, they use that sing-songy voice that you use for like an old but adult grandparent to try and keep them happy, to try and encourage them, to try to keep them distracted. And just watching that was truly amazing. And then the, I think, funniest aspect of all was watching all of these media people who are about to show you who have spent a year or 5 years angrily denying that Joe Biden had anything wrong with him due to his advanced age, sit there in nausea and horror and disgust as they all had to grapple with the fact that there was no way to hide it any longer. Now, the interesting part of this whole issue of cognitive impairment is that polls have been showing for quite a long time that the American people have no doubt that Joe Biden is cognitively impaired. And the reason for it is because they've all had the experience of dealing with an elderly loved one as they decline in their sunset years. And there's nothing these media people can tell them to convince them not to believe what they're seeing with their own eyes on an issue that they trust their own judgment on more than anybody else's, as they should, because they've gone through it in their life. So just to give you an extent of how vast is the public opinion, we've shown you before polling data that shows that a gigantic percentage more believe that Biden is addled by age than Trump is, including Democrats, independents, and conservatives. But here was a segment that happened on MSNBC today that revealed just how vast this difference is. And this was before the debate. This was before last night's debate.
How would it happen? Who would be able to fill the spot? We go to Steve Kornacki, because there are some indications with numbers to answer those questions.
Yeah, I mean, a couple ways of looking at it, Chris. First of all, the backdrop for that performance Joe Biden gave last night and the reaction you're getting from Democrats. Look at it this way. Back in the 2020 campaign, from our NBC poll, we asked folks who is better when it comes to having the necessary mental and physical health to be president. And there's basically a wash. 41 said Biden, 40 said Trump. So.
All right, so it doesn't have the most important part of the video where he then shows how those percentages have changed up until this year, where it's something like 65% of people believe that Biden doesn't have the necessary mental and physical health to be president, and something like 34% or 40% believe that about Trump. So the gap has grown enormously as people have watched Joe Biden over the last 4 years. That's the next column, which would have shown, had we had it, that in 2024, this gap has exploded. Now, I think one of the most important parts is, while the American people in every poll have said that they know that Joe Biden is cognitively impaired and not capable of doing the job as president, the media, it is important to remember, has very aggressively and angrily insisted that not only is there nothing wrong with Biden, but that the reason Americans believe that there's something wrong with Biden is only because right-wing operatives and other manipulators of videos have tried and deceived Americans into believing it. So here, for example, is the Washington Post. This was from just a week ago, or 2 weeks ago, June 14th. This was when there were videos of Biden's trip to Europe that were circulating, and that fundraiser that he did with President Obama, where you could see that he was distracted. He didn't know where he was. He didn't know where he was supposed to be. He had to be led around. And the media decided to unite and claim that these videos were manipulated to try and make it look as if Biden was suffering from confusion, when in fact he's as sharp as ever. Here was just one example from the Washington Post. There you see the headline, quote, "Cheap fake." This is a new word they invented. They can't claim the video is fake. They can't claim that it was doctored. They can't claim it was manipulated, because it was the exact video that showed what Joe Biden was doing. So they invented a new word, cheap fake, kind of like what they did with disinformation or misinformation and malinformation. And they said cheap fake Biden videos enrapture right-wing media, but deeply mislead. Quote, "The Republican National Committee posts a clipped video, then the New York Post, the Telegraph, and other pro-Trump outlets follow suit with the same deceptive framing." So just 2 weeks ago, the media was insisting that the only reason Joe Biden looked in any way to be impaired is because right-wing liars were clipping videos in a deceitful way to make it appear as though this very robust, focused, energetic, and present leader was something that he wasn't, which is confused, disoriented, and cognitively declining very rapidly. Here's a supercut of just a couple minutes of media figures who have been insisting over the last year that there's nothing wrong with Joe Biden, that they know personally that in private and when no one's looking, but also in public, he's as sharp as he has ever been. He is a very alert and connected and engaged leader who understands complexities and makes very complex decisions without the slightest difficulty. This is what they were saying in the months and weeks heading into the humiliation last night. Just get a little bit of taste of this.
Start your tape right now, because I'm about to tell you the truth. And F you if you can't handle the truth. This version of Biden is the best Biden ever.
She knows so long as she was 9.
In fact, I think he's better than he's ever been.
President Biden has a photographic memory. His understanding and mastery of a complicated geopolitical situation is remarkable.
He is sharp, intensely probing, and detail-oriented and focused.
Jackie, are you here? Where's Jackie? I didn't think she was going to be here.
I was sitting, 2 feet from him across the table, and he was, intense.
Have trouble walking sometimes? Yeah, so did FDR. He wanted GD war.
But he's totally focused. He's very sharp.
They say he's sharp in meetings and so on.
Very lucid, very well informed. Biden is stately, and he comes with gravitas. There hasn't been, as far as I know, a single claim that Biden made a mistake. Ageism is an issue. Americans have a rich history of holding people's physical characteristics against them. Okay, you can ask African Americans.
He's older. That doesn't mean that he is unfit, and there's a lot of ageism there.
Now, this age attack, this obsession by the right.
Joe Biden may not be able to speak for himself the way that he used to.
They want to think to take on government if we get out of line, which they're talking again about, and that's him lying around.
I think people should be speaking up for Joe Biden.
Americans and reporters in the media are just judging him by a physical appearance, and it's horribly unfair.
Not only, and by the way, Van Jones was in that clip insisting that it was an outrageous attack to suggest that Biden was anything other than an alert and engaged leader. And then that same Van Jones went on CNN last night right after the debate ended, and he was basically on the verge of tears saying, I love Joe Biden. I love the guy. I love the guy. And it pains me to watch him this way. He needs to drop out of the race. None of us want to see him this way. I mean, this isn't from 4 years ago or 6 years ago. This is from this year. And they even went so far, of course, on NBC to try and claim that Joe Biden was the victim of some kind of ugly prejudice akin to racism because people were condemning him based on his physical appearance. You just see the propaganda, and they read from the same script. They all sound exactly alike because they're getting their orders from the same place. These are herd animals. And they all were running in one direction, and suddenly last night they all stopped and ran in exactly the opposite direction, together reading from the same script as well. They were getting their words from all their Democratic sources who were telling them, we need to get Joe Biden out of this race, we're panicking, and they were just reading from their phones and repeating it all together. There's not a single note of dissent ever from this crowd. They say the same things over and over without the slightest regard for whether it's true. Now, let me just show you a couple of the most extreme examples. Earlier this month, at the very beginning of this month, the Wall Street Journal published a very deeply reported article that detailed how in private meetings, contrary to what Democrats were claiming, Biden often faded out. He would speak and ramble in such a low voice that no one could understand what he was saying. Basically, they were describing exactly the Joe Biden we saw last night at the debates. And this wasn't the Wall Street Journal op-ed page, this was the Wall Street Journal reporting team. And so many of the Democratic Party on-air personalities were so enraged by the fact that the Wall Street Journal reported this that they couldn't even contain their anger. And again, this is only 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago. Listen to what Joe Scarborough and that crew that he has there on that morning show that Biden loves and watches every morning. Watch what they were saying just 3 weeks ago about that Wall Street Journal report.
My meetings with the president over the past year, Willie, and talked to Mike and Meek about it, and I said it in real time. The guy, you see both those guys right there? I've spent time with both of those guys privately. I've spent time with Biden and Trump privately. I've spent time with every House Speaker over the past 30 years and Joe Biden. It's just not close. If you want to talk about international affairs, if you want to talk about how to get bipartisan legislation, Joe Biden is light years ahead of all of them.
Joe Biden is light years ahead when it comes to complex foreign policy, complex economic and domestic policy. He's light years ahead of every single House Speaker over the last 30 years with whom Joe Biden has spent his time. John Boehner, Paul Ryan, Nancy Pelosi, Kevin McCarthy, Mike Johnson, going all the way back 30 years. Every single one of those House leaders, according to Joe Scarborough, just 2.5 weeks ago, didn't have even a fraction of the capacity to be in charge to understand complicated information the way that Joe Biden does, the way that Joe Biden can. This went on like this.
And the fact that the Wall Street Journal knew these quotes were out there, that editors, I'm not looking at the reporter. People always blame the reporter. There are a line of editors behind every story that's done. The editors saw that Kevin McCarthy had a habit of saying one thing in public, lying in public, and then privately telling his aides just the opposite. That Biden was sharp, that he was cogent, that he was substantive. And in the same meeting that Kevin McCarthy is now telling the Wall Street Journal Biden was out of it, he went out and he told reporters after the meeting that the meeting was, quote, the best yet. We're making progress, and I'm going to be talking.
There's that photo of Joe Biden in his Ray-Bans just to show the point of how tough and strong and energetic of a leader he is. And there you see on the screen, Wall Street Journal relies on former Speaker Kevin McCarthy to criticize Biden's acuity. They were rolling out every stop to try and discredit and maul the Wall Street Journal for daring to suggest that Joe Biden behaves exactly the way that he behaved last night, and he does it all the time in private meetings where they're there to discuss policy.
To Joe Biden every day. Very professional, very smart, very tough. I don't even know what to say. I really don't even know what to say here.
Well, let's begin with the fact that Joe Biden is 81 years old. Donald Trump, by the way, will be 78 next week, so he's not much younger. So, yes, does he move a little slower and speak a little softer than he did 15 years ago when he was vice president, as former Speaker McCarthy says in the piece? Sure does, yeah. I think most 81-year-olds do, or most people are different than they were 15 years ago. This does have the feeling of Trump acolytes laundering their attacks through a reputable, prestigious news organization in the Wall Street.
This was Trump acolytes just making stuff up and then laundering their lies through the Wall Street Journal to imply that Joe Biden wasn't what he really is, which is a very mentally astute leader that dominates rooms that he's in, understands complexities better than men half his age. In fact, better than every House Speaker of the last 30 years. He's in a different universe, they said.
Street Journal. Also, the point about notes, as Richard Haas would tell you, presidents use notes in meetings. That's not unusual. They might have a sheet, they might have a card in front of them with some points that they want to make. I would also point out Donald Trump has a person who follows him with a printer to print things out for him so he can have hard copies so he can read his notes and facts and lies often that he rattles off. And then the other point to make is, will the Wall Street Journal have a piece about Donald Trump and his mental acuity? All you have to do is watch the 90 minutes of that Fox News interview over the weekend.
I mean, this is really North Korean style propaganda. I know that's a cliche, but they spent, close to 5 minutes just there alone expressing indignation that anyone would question Joe Biden's mental state. That was June 9th. So 2 weeks ago, a little more than 2 weeks ago. This morning, after that presidential debate, the very same program, Morning Joe, composed of the very same people that you just watched, went on the air and said exactly the opposite. Because they could no longer lie. The evidence was too glaring even for people this shameless to continue to lie. Look at what the funeral that they held for Joe Biden's candidacy looked like this morning on that show.
I think his presidency has been an unqualified success. If, however, you believe, as do I, and as do so many people who watch this program and who fear just how dark of a place a second Donald Trump term will take America, then I think it's critical that we ask the same questions about this man I love, respect, and whose public service in saving this country from Donald Trump over the last 3.5 years I honor and always will. I think we have to ask the same questions.
By the way, it is hard to overstate how many of these people in media last night and this morning and through today, when forced to admit, just to save the last vestige of their credibility, that Joe Biden is actually suffering from a serious form of senility, even though they were saying 2 weeks ago that it was outrageous even to suggest that. It's hard to overstate how many of them began by saying, I love Joe Biden very deeply. He's a good friend of mine. I love the guy. And that's why it pains me to have to say this. Tom Friedman started his article that way in the New York Times, calling on Biden to drop out of the race. So many CNN people said it. Here you see Joe Scarborough saying it. It was all over the place. You're not supposed to be friends with, let alone deeply love on a personal level, a politician whom you're supposed to be adversarially covering. That is not the healthy and correct relationship between a journalist on the one hand and the most powerful politician in the country on the other. But this is just one of the reasons why the media in our country is so hated and disrespected and distrusted. Because people understand that they have completely abdicated what they always claimed was their responsibility and their function, and they have a completely different function instead. Let's hear the rest of this week by the very same person who just 2 weeks ago was saying you are a right-wing liar if you even questioned Joe Biden's mental capability, that he was in a different universe in ability right now than everybody else in Washington. Let's listen to the rest.
Of him that we have asked of Donald Trump since 2016, and that is, if he were CEO and he turned in a performance like that, would any corporation in America, any Fortune 500 corporation in America, keep him on as CEO? If this were Donald Trump, time and time again, we talked about the Goldwater. Where's the Barry Goldwater? To walk over and tell Richard Nixon it was over, to tell Donald Trump it was over. And now the question is, do Democrats need to do the same thing of Joe Biden? I mean, these are hard questions, but the fact is, friends, failure's just not an option. In 2024, failure is not an option. So who I love, who I respect, who I revere for their work and their duty to service over their lifetime really is not relevant. It's not relevant for any of us. It's not relevant for Democratic leaders. It's not relevant for anyone. The question is, we know Joe Biden can govern. Mm-hmm. And again, I'll debate that issue with anyone, and I will win. I will destroy anybody that wants to debate Joe Biden's record over the past 3.5 years. He can run the White House. He can run the country effectively, despite the barrage of lies that constantly come at him, like Donald Trump's lies last night. But can he run for president in 2024? Donald Trump lied over and over and over and over again. And Joe Biden couldn't respond to any of those lies.
You know, maybe this is naive of me to say, But when I see this, I genuinely do not understand. I mean, I cannot comprehend. I really cannot. I'm not saying this to make a point. How it is that someone can go on television before a camera 2 weeks ago and rant and rave at anybody who would dare suggest that there was something addled about Joe Biden, and call everyone who suggested it a liar and swear up and down that you've never seen anybody as in command and in control and physically and mentally adept as Joe Biden, and you create this whole emotional melodrama in defense of Joe Biden's mental acuity, attacking anyone who and then just 2 weeks later, not 2 months, not 2 years, 2 weeks later, you go right before that same camera, and with just as much melodrama, you sit there and say it's time for a Democrat who has the authority and stature that Barry Goldwater had to tell Richard Nixon it was time for him to leave, to go over to the White House and tell Joe Biden, look, it's over. You need to pull out of this race because you are not mentally capable of running a campaign and withstanding its rigors. Without at least acknowledging that you had spent months swearing up and down that he was perfect mentally, and that the only people questioning this were liars and smear artists and right-wing monsters who believe in deceit. How is it that you don't at least acknowledge that? You're talking to the same audience who watched you do this over months. And you can at least say, look, I guess I was wrong when I swore to you up and down many, many times that Joe Biden was in a different universe than every other younger politician. I'm now here to say I got that totally wrong, and I apologize to the people that I called liars for saying over the last several months what I am now saying because I'm forced to. These people are completely shameless. And when it becomes clear, as it pretty much already is, that Joe Biden's not going anywhere, there's no possibility that Joe Biden is going to voluntarily give up the power and the title that he spent his entire life chasing. And when you see senior Democratic leaders like Barack Obama and Steny Hoyer and Hakeem Jeffries come out and circle the wagons around Biden and say, okay, he had one bad debate, but he is our leader, it becomes totally clear that he's not going anywhere. You're going to see how fast these people are going to go back. And they're going to be saying in about 3 days, you know what, it was one bad debate. Who cares? In the scheme of things, given how great Joe Biden is and what a menace Donald Trump is, that debate didn't matter. This is one debate. You don't throw a guy overboard for one night. You're going to hear all of that very, very shortly.